Oh, hey everybody. Welcome to the Tonto's Demise Week 11 recap. Sorry here. Just, I don't know. I got some criticism last week. Decided to change some things around here. There were some complaints that the room is too dark, so I got the spotlight shining on me. Is that bright enough now? And I understand that no one apparently likes to look into my eyes for 45 to 60 minutes. So I got the sunglasses on. Everybody was, I don't know if you were criticizing or complimenting the t-shirt selection from week to week, but the pressure, I crumbled like a house of cards under the pressure, and I just couldn't decide this week what t-shirt to wear. So I couldn't pick. So here we are. You guys, you've brought this upon yourselves. I'm a man of the people. You wanted all these things. You wanted the light. You wanted the sunglasses. I got you those. You want the t-shirt. Like I said, you put the pressure on me, and I can't take it. So you'll just have to deal with it. But anyway, how about we just get right down to it then with the matchups from this Week 11, which, as everybody knows, I was pretty excited about. Everyone was. And the results were less than what I'd hoped for, but they were pretty good. Pretty good games all around. Let's start off first with the Rook, who is going up, the defending champ, Rook, who is already dead and buried, going up against the Demise Hooligans, who were also vying for the knockout pool money this week, which, by the way, he did win. We'll get to that later. Demise Hooligans takes down the Rook by a score of 165.45 to 128.75. Let's see. For Demise Hooligans, he took this one down, 165, like I said. Another good game for Aaron Rodgers, 58 points there. I think they pulled him sometime in the fourth quarter. I don't know if it was halfway through, but because they were winning so handily. Got to see the wonderful Matt Flynn again. Emmanuel Sanders, 21 points from him. Unfortunately, he took a big hit from somebody from the Rams. Definitely got a concussion, I believe. Don't think he'll be out for too long. But speaking of being out for too long, Brandon Cooks suffered a broken thumb, if I remember correctly. You got 10 points from him, but he's going to be out for a couple weeks. You might not. Only a couple weeks left in the fantasy season and playoffs, 5 total. So you might not see him again until 2015. We'll have to wait and see. Alfred Blue stepped in for the injured Arian Foster. 156 rushing yards from him. Good for 18.6. Not much else from Kelsey or Deshaun Jackson or Theo Riddick. Even a quiet game from Gostowski because they scored all touchdowns. 6 points from him. Houston defense, another pretty good performance this week, and it was enough to take down the Rook, who surprisingly started the St. Louis Rams defense against the Denver Broncos. Turned out to be a pretty good move. Yahoo says 14. I think it was a little bit more than that, because they definitely had less than 50 yards rushing, which was 9 points there. Phillip Rivers, unfortunately, in a juicy matchup against at least what should have been a great matchup against the Oakland Raiders at home. Should have been a shootout or just a crazy fantasy game. Only 36 from him. There was only 19 points scored in that game, surprisingly. Beckham Jr., another decent performance. Would have liked to see a touchdown from him or two. Steven Jackson, was that his name? Chris Sims? I don't even know who he is. Doesn't matter. Nothing from him. Tim Wright caught one pass. Fortunately, it was for a touchdown. Andre Johnson, you had him in the flex, which cost you, 3 points from Julian Edelman. You didn't have him in the flex. I don't know why you would flex Andre Johnson when you have a guy like Edelman who is an all-purpose receiver who's going to get, every now and then, he's going to get a rushing attempt. Definitely more likely than Old Man Johnson. But yeah, on Martavis Bryant, his touchdown streak comes to an end. And yeah, that's the total. Ended up with a total of, like I said, 128.75. Gets you another loss. You move down to 2-9, and you are stuck in 12th place. This might be the second year in a row where the champion goes from first to worst. Strangely enough, so whoever wins this year has got to be pretty nervous going into the draft next year. Let's see. Oh, and with that win, we had the Dubsy Hooligans, I should say. He moves to 7-4. He wins the knockout pool, and he is up all the way up to 4th place. 7 wins. Yahoo doesn't have you as clinching a playoff spot yet, but fairly certain you're going to it would pretty much take a miracle for the Dubsy Hooligans to miss the playoffs at this point. Speaking of, while we're on the topic of teams at the bottom, here we will get to, the Detonators went up against McCoy's Homeboys. Also, and one of the last place teams that was dead and buried after last week couldn't come through again with a upset, as the Detonators have the highest score of the week with 196.95 against McCoy's Homeboys 140.6. 50 points from Drew Brees. Mike Evans continues to be on fire. He had over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns this week. 43 points from him. So there's almost 100 just between those two. New England shut down T.Y. Hilton, but you got a couple catches and a touchdown from Doug Baldwin. Eddie Lacy, who you took from the Rook, inexplicably still. He had 2 touchdowns, 1 receiving, 1 rushing. Joik Bell, decent game. Very quiet. Martellus Bennett, the Black Unicorn. Shane Vereen didn't do too much. Somebody else did, but we'll get to that later. And the San Diego defense, pretty good game for them against the Oakland Raiders, as I said. Yahoo says 14 for your D. I think it was definitely probably at least double. I think it was double that. And almost 200 for the Detonators this week, in what was, in general, a fairly low-scoring week for most teams, including McCoy's Homeboys. He started Derek Carr because he didn't have Tony Romo this week. Seemed like it could have been a shootout, or at least a good game for some passing, some garbage time passing yards, maybe a touchdown or 2. But you were only able to get 23 points from him. Jordan Matthews picked him up. Bean dropped him, picked him up off the waiver wire, and ever since Nick Foles went down and Mark Sanchez went in, he has been gold. 5 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown for him. 2 touchdowns for Brandon Marshall. Roddy White got a touchdown. McCoy, though, only 88 yards from him, no scores. You picked up Devontae Freeman. Your brother's trash. Not much from him. Greg Olsen, not much from him. Miles Austin, not much from him. Mason Crosby, mostly PATs this week. And the Minnesota defense seemed like a pretty good play, considering all the turnovers that Jay Cutler has been committing. but they lost the game, didn't do too well. Got a couple picks, but it wasn't enough. Wasn't nearly enough or as much as you were probably hoping for. But wound up, said 140.6, not a bad score, not a great score, but not enough to get this one done when you go up against the highest scoring team of the week, which was the Detonators. With that loss, the McCoy's Homeboys drops all down to 2-9. You stay in 11th place though, battling for the basement, trying to avoid that, having to wear the Rivers jersey next year. And as for the Detonators, he was 5-5, needed to pull this one out. He did. Now you are 6-5, not in the playoffs yet, but definitely making a strong push. And you are now in 5th place. Let's see who is next. All right, we had another team that was 5-5, needed to get a win this week, which was FC Hayward, the Twerkin Bowl Cuts. Unfortunately, he was going up against a strong team, the FC Bahoric, the Midgets Cut Hair. And Midgets takes this one down fairly easily by a score of 159.7 to an even 107. For FC, almost 50 points from Matt Ryan. Jordy Nelson, good for 21. Thought he was going to get a long touchdown there, but not quite. But he did have one, but only 4 catches. Julio Jones, 12 from him. Quiet one from Sammy Watkins. And the Buffalo defense on Thursday night, the Buffalo defense, even though they lost the game, they actually did fairly well because they had a couple turnovers. But that definitely had to have you worried for a couple days. Like I said, that was Thursday night. You had to have been a little bit worried going into Sunday. Marshawn Lynch, you're not going to get 4 touchdowns from him every week. And he looked like he was hurting. They were stretching him any which way they could before the game, during halftime, but he went out there and got 124 yards for you. Alfred Morris, 96 yards from him. Unfortunately, Dwayne Allen, looks like he tweaked an ankle, something like that. He was out, got you 0. Fortunately, it didn't matter because you also had C.J. Anderson, who went out and you had him in the flex. He had 8 catches for 30 yards, tacked on 86. No, I'm sorry, that's backwards. He had 8 catches for 86 receiving, but he only had 30 rushing yards. About 20 points from him. As for FC Hayward, Andy Dalton in what seemed like a pretty good matchup against the New Orleans Saints, struggling team lately, but not nearly as struggling as Andy Dalton has been. But you got 40 points from him. Your receivers, you had Dwayne Bowe, 2 catches from him. Greg Jennings, only 1 catch. Ruben Randall actually showed up this week, 7 for 112. Macklin in a flex, another good week from him, 25 points. Terrence West, though, Cleveland running back, only 12 yards. Brandon Oliver, only 36 yards. And your other big gun besides Macklin is Julius Thomas. Looks like early on in that game he sprained an ankle. Don't know what his status will be for the weeks coming up. But you definitely got to be worried. Although, I think you did trade for somebody who could possibly help you out here in these last couple weeks. Billy Cundiff, your kicker, he got you 0 because he missed a field goal and made 1 PAT. Tough matchup for the Seattle Seahawks defense on the road at Kansas City. Couple turnovers, but pretty low passing yardage from Alex Smith helped you out. But definitely not the kind of game you're used to from the Seattle Seahawks defense, especially after the way they performed last year. And like I said, Dwayne Bowe, 3 points from him. Jennings 1, West 1, Oliver 3, Julius Thomas 2, Cundiff 0. It's not gonna get you a win. Pretty much ever. So, like I said, FC Hayward with only 107 drops him. He was 5-5. He's now 5-6. But you dropped to 7th place. Still got 2 weeks to go. Definitely not out of it yet. As for FC Bohoric, he is now 8-3, all the way up to 8-3. 3rd place, nipping at the heels of Jimmy and Tree. Gotta be nervous. Those guys need to keep on winning. And because, say, FC Bohoric's knocking on your door, looking to maybe sneak a bye week here, going into the playoffs. Who is next? Okay, we had 2 teams that were, 4-6. Both of them needed to win this one. I think we talked a little bit about this last week. This was Nick Foley and Dynamite going up against You Ma Puddin'. Like I said, they were both 4-6. You lose this one, you're 4-7. You're gasping for air. You're on life support. However the podcasters want to mention it, however they want to describe it, I should say. But this one went in favor of You My Puddin', who got 142.3 against the Nick Foley and Dynamite, 123.55. Might have been, I know there were some trade talks for quarterback, but the Nick Foley and Dynamite passed on a couple potential moves that he could have done. Stuck with Kaepernick. Got you 31 points this week. That's about what you're going to expect. But Eli Manning actually did even worse. Excuse me. This has to be a tough one for Nick Foley and Dynamite, because you lost to a team whose quarterback threw 5 interceptions. 5. That's minus 15 points. And you still lost. AJ Green, 120 yards and a touchdown. Crabtree, touchdown for him. 80 yards for Hopkins. Andre Williams, not much. Frank Gore, almost 100 yards, not quite. Lost the fumble, though. Quiet one from Antonio Gates and Andre Ellington. A bunch of field goals, though, from your kicker, Matt Bryant. And the Atlanta defense also playing here. The Atlanta kicker and the Atlanta defense. Pretty good play, although the Falcons have been notoriously poor on the road, but they were able to sneak out a win here against at Carolina. Cam Newton hasn't been playing very well documented. Excuse me. Couple turnovers. They blocked a kick at the end. That got you some extra points for the total of 142.3. And as for Dynamite, quiet one from Mike Wallace, only 7 points from him. Alshon Jeffrey finally getting a big game from him, 30.5 points, 11 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown. The kind of production you were hoping from him at least every other week this year, and not once for the whole season. Pierre Garcon, another big disappointment this year. Only 1 catch this week. I believe he was the league leader last year in catches, over 100. So he's obviously been a huge disappointment this year. I don't know where he's at in terms of catches and yards and touchdowns, but he can't be very, very high. I know, as I recall, FC Bohoric really struggled with whether or not he should keep Pierre Garcon this year. He went with Cordarrelle Patterson instead. In that point, obviously Cordarrelle Patterson has been quite the disappointment himself, but it was a fairly low draft pick. It would have been a lot worse for FC if he had kept Pierre Garçon and had to count on him as being a starting receiver and being stuck with the very poor production that he's gotten from this guy that Nick Foley and Dynamite has been stuck with. Okay, enough about that. Rashad Jennings comes back from injury, 60 yards from him. Carlos Hyde plugged him in, hoping for a touchdown maybe. Couldn't quite do it. He only had 25 rushing yards. Jimmy Graham seemed like a great matchup. Pretty much every matchup every week, you expect Jimmy Graham to go off for 20, 30 points. Unfortunately, you only got 6 from him this week. Gronk had a crazy touchdown, ran over everybody. Got you 17 points there. Phil Dawson, a couple field goals again from him. And the aforementioned St. Louis versus Denver game started the Denver defense, and they pretty much got pummeled. Only a couple sacks, gave up almost too many points, not quite enough there. But Yahoo says 6. That might be right if I remember correctly, or else it was somewhere in those single digits. Not enough to get you a win this week, even though Puddin only scored 142, which is 142 is going to get you a win maybe every other time. It's not a good score, but like I said, this was a very surprisingly low-scoring week for most teams, and again, another disappointment for Nick Foley and Dynamite. As for You My Puddin, he moves up to 5 and 6. Still, though, you're muddled down in 8th place. As for Dynamite, he drops to 4 and 7, and all the way down to 10th place. Okay, next up, these last 2 matchups were the top 2 teams. First, we had the number 2 team, Possum Magic, going up against the Springfield Isotopes. Both teams trying to knock each other out of a winning streak. Unfortunately for the Isotopes, they could not do it in a week that was very winnable for facing Possum Magic. As well, I should say, getting ahead of myself. His final score was Possum Magic wins this one, 156.45 to 117.75. Like I said, this one was a winnable matchup. 156 is a pretty low score for Possum Magic this year, riding his 8-game winning streak. He got 55 from Peyton Manning. Kelvin Benjamin, couple catches and a touchdown near the end of that game. Got here 26. Not much, though, from Fitzgerald. Keenan Allen pretty much went toe-to-toe with Malcolm Floyd. Both of those guys, 14.5 points. Mark Ingram, quiet game from him, which I was pretty thankful for at the time. But 67 rushing yards. Jerick McKinnon, 38 rushing yards from him. Larry Donnell, unfortunately, for me, had got a touchdown early in that game. Didn't do too much else. And probably the most significant part of the Possum Magic roster this week was Ahmad Bradshaw. He only got you 5 points, and now looks like he is going to be out for the rest of the year with a broken ankle, broken something in his leg. He was quite possibly the sleeper on your team that was really one of the key components, I think. Been carrying your team through most of the season, quietly getting production from him, especially in the receiving game. He's been a great flex play. So that's going to be a tough loss for Boston Magic these next couple weeks. On top of Ronnie Hillman already being out, he could be out another. Who knows with those foot injuries? He could be out maybe the rest of the fantasy season. I'm sure you're hoping not, but it's definitely. I think even Larry Fitzgerald, he's going to be playing with he's going to try to play through a sprained knee ligament. So things are going to be tough here for Boston Magic, but it wasn't tough this week as he extends his winning streak to 9 games. As for the Isotopes, couple 3-game winning streak going into this one. Needed to get a win here, try to take down Boston Magic. Made a trade with Twerk and Bowl Cuts, sending Des Bryant over to the Twerk and Bowl Cuts for Golden Tate. Controversial trade, I think, when it was made last week. The podcasters seemed to go bananas about that, but I wasn't too worried about it. I felt really confident. If you look at Golden Tate's stat line, I understand that Calvin Johnson has been out for a lot of the year, but even last week, this was a trade that I thought about for a long time and would not have pulled or even considered if Golden Tate had not performed very well once Calvin Johnson came back. But if you look at the game last week, if you look at the box score, Golden Tate, I think he was targeted 13 times, had 11 catches for over 100 yards. So I felt pretty confident that he was not going to drop off, was not going to be that significant. Des Bryant, great player, I know, but he doesn't always put up 20 to 30 points every week. Really, statistically, they were toe-to-toe with each other all season long, so pretty fair trade, I thought. But I'll stop talking about my team now because I know you guys don't like it. And unfortunately, so I put all my marbles on the Detroit Lions here this week. Thought they'd get a good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. I know Cardinals played pretty good defense, but Calvin Johnson, Golden Tate coming on. Seems like I don't know if the Cardinals, they play pretty strong run defense. They were beatable in the past, but needless to say, Matthew Stafford went out and had his worst performance of the entire season. Only 24 points from him. Antonio Brown, Antonio Brown scored .05 less than Matthew Stafford. Like I said, Malcolm Floyd, 14 points from him. Golden Tate, only 2 catches for 40 yards. Big disappointment there. Matt Asiata, 2 yards from him. Was hoping to maybe get a touchdown. Something from him there. LeGarrette Blount, big 0 from him. Thought maybe he would get some yards or maybe squeak a touchdown in that game. As you may or may not know, he is now no longer a Pittsburgh Steeler. I guess the reason he did not get in, he's got a bad attitude. He's been a bad influence in the locker room. Poor influence on Le'Veon Bell, apparently, this year. And they cut ties with him. And I think he was I only saw him on the field one time yesterday. And now he's no longer on the team. And another big disappointment, Kyle Rudolph, a 0 from him, coming back from injury. A lot of fantasy pundits said, you got to start Kyle Rudolph. He's coming back, but he's got a great matchup against the Chicago Bears defense, who given up the most fantasy points to tight ends this year. Got to start Kyle Rudolph. Great play. Got to pick him up and use him. So I did that. And all these fantasy pundits who get paid a lot more than me are, I don't know, very upset with them. Again, not to get off track here, but I did make a trade proposal trying to move Kyle Rudolph before this week, before the trade deadline, offered him up for Kobe Fleener, who McCoy's Homeboys hasn't used once this year. Guys, and this comes up again with my trade offer to Twerk and Bowl Cuts for Golden Tate. I called him up, called Josh up, and said, "Hey, are you gonna accept this trade or not? I need to know because I got other trades going on, other possibilities in the works here." And he says, "I didn't even know this. I didn't even know that was on the table there." Well, please, guys, have some respect. Somebody sends you a trade request. Pay attention to the league, please. If it's only one day during the week, if somebody sends you should be getting an email notification when that kind of stuff happens. If somebody sends you a trade request, don't at least deny it, or don't just not do anything. That was the most frustrating part. I guess I'm gonna say I'm calling you out, McCoy's Homeboys, because I sent you a trade offer, Kyle Rudolph for Kobe Fleener, and did not hear anything. And the trade deadline came and went, and I got the notification that, sorry, since the deadline has passed, this trade is invalid. So, guys, if someone makes you an offer, at least have the courtesy to deny it or respond in some way. Okay, back on track. Jamal Charles, big game from him, 160 yards, 2 touchdowns. Not much from the kicker, Arizona kicker, and I really hated this move. I tried to trade the New England defense to some people. Nobody would bite. I ended up having to pick up Washington. Thought maybe they would do okay against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, coming off a bye, playing at home, and they did absolutely next to nothing. They lost the game. They had 1 turnover, 2 sacks. Almost, they gave up too many points. I think the only saving grace in this one was that Tampa Bay had less than 50 rushing yards, which got me 9 points there. Other than that, just a miserable performance from them. Actually, I would have been better off playing the New England defense, who was in Indianapolis. Seemed like a scary matchup. It's tough to think that they're going to do well in that kind of an environment, especially against Andrew Luck, a good team like that. They actually would have outscored the Washington defense, but it was only by maybe 4 or 5 points, something like that. And it was, so, like I said, between 3 players, Asiata, Blunt, and Rudolph, the Isotopes got 0.2, which is not enough. Matthew Stafford, like I said, lowest score of the whole year at the time when the Isotopes really needed him the most. These guys to come through, not just in the matchup against Possum Magic, which would have been nice to knock him off, but also the Isotopes were going up against Dub C to try and win the knockout pool, but that didn't happen either. And yeah, in the Isotopes needed the 1 week that they really needed to get a good score and do well. Needed his guys to come through, and they did not come through. They did not, with the worst performance of the entire season thus far. Okay, and we had one more matchup. Everybody's, I'm sure, oh, thank God he's done talking about his own team. But the next matchup, we had the Huber Squashers, who scored 133.35. Actually, this was a strange matchup this week because the Huber Squashers actually went up against the Huber. We had the Huber Squashers starting lineup going up against the Huber Squashers bench players, and the Huber Squashers, the Huber Squashers bench players We only needed three of them. They were Mark Sanchez, the Green Bay Packers defense, and Jonas Gray. Those three guys outscored the Huber Squashers starting lineup by a score of 136.2 to 133.35. So congratulations this week to the Huber Squashers bench players. You definitely stepped it up this week, had a great one, and if you had actually counted and been playing for something this week that mattered in any sort of viable way, you would have defeated the Huber Squashers themselves. But as for defeating the Huber Squashers themselves, that was done by none other than one of the Huber brothers himself, Jimmy the Commish, New Gods Mad Titans. He takes down the Huber Squasher, 166.25 to the aforementioned 133.35. Not actually a fairly quiet game from Andrew Luck, only 48 points from him, 17 from Demaryius Thomas. Matt Forte just carrying the load this year. Great play. Seems like every week. Got him in the flex. He's been catching passes here left and right. He might be one of the highest stat-wise. He might be. I don't know if he is leading the league in receptions. I think he was at one point in this league, but in the season, but he might be. He's got to be definitely up there because he's been catching passes 5 to 6 at least. Seems like every single week, and the Wolves have finally been using him in the proper spot in the flex every week. Now we also had Sanu getting 5, Andre Holmes 4, 150 yards though from Jeremy Hill, balances out the 4 yards from Bobby Rainey. Rivera, sneaky tight end play, everybody thought, but he only got you 7. Carpenter, a couple field goals from him. And the Arizona defense pretty much shut down, as I said, the Detroit Lions offense. Only gave up 6 points, got a couple sacks, a turnover. Pretty good score for them. And that was definitely enough to take this one down. I'm sure if you had told the Huber Squashers that Andrew Luck was only going to get 48. Well, if you told him that Demaryius Thomas was only going to score 17 points this week, I'm sure he would have been pretty excited and thought he had a pretty good chance to win this one. Unfortunately, of the couple quarterbacks that the Huber Squashers have to pick from, went with Tom Brady this week, which really you can't argue with. Big matchup. You expected it was a high scoring game. Thought maybe it'd be a better QB game, but as we all know, on his bench, the Huber Squashers bench, Jonas Gray, 200 yards and 4 touchdowns from him, which is pretty much all the touchdowns. That's where they all came from. So Tom Brady, only 34 points from him. Another disappointing game for Vincent Jackson. Disappointment for Calvin Johnson, only 10 points from him. Randall Cobb, though, 10 catches, 120 yards. Probably would have liked to see him snag a touchdown in there somewhere. Wasted fantastic performance from Le'Veon Bell, over 200 yards and a touchdown from him. Not too much, though, from Ryan Matthews, Jordan Reed, Brandon LaFell, McManus, 1 point there. Started the Cleveland Browns defense. Out of your choices of Cleveland, San Francisco, and Green Bay, I understand an understandable play going into this game. You were Cleveland Browns. They're at home playing against Ryan Mallett, I think, for his first start of his career, at least with Houston. They plugged him in. You had San Francisco at the Giants. you got a good defense going up against Eli Manning, who is a turnover machine, at least sometimes. He definitely was this week. 5 turnovers from him, 5 picks from him. But you had also the Green Bay defense, who, in what seemed like a pretty tough matchup, at home though against the high-scoring Philadelphia Eagles. That's a tough call too. The Eagles can go anywhere and put up a bunch of points, but this week was mostly their score was definitely boosted a lot. I think it would have been 45 points from them. They had 2 turnovers that went for touchdowns and a punt return that went for a touchdown. And so, it's easy to look at it now. Hindsight is 2020. Unless you've been watching SportsCenter, you'll know that according to Cam Newton, hindsight is actually 50-50. So think about that one. Think about how much money that guy makes, and that's how smart he is. It's a good feeling, isn't it, guys? But anyway, those moves, some of those roster moves just didn't pan out for the Huber Squashers this week. But really don't feel bad. Are you really going to play Jonas Gray, a guy who's never scored a touchdown in his career before this week, when you've got Tom Brady in what should be a shootout, high-scoring affair? Yeah, he disappointed that happened. And really, are you going to start Mark Sanchez every week? He's a guy who is pretty undependable. He actually, even though he scored, Sanchez on your bench scored 44 points. That's including the 4 turnovers that he committed. He had 2 picks and 2 fumbles lost to the Green Bay defense. So, were you really going to start Mark Sanchez going up against your own defense if Green Bay, it's like I said, we can look at this now and laugh about it and to say, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? But the plays at the time going into the week, other than Cleveland being a little questionable, definitely seemed like all the right moves. Not much you can do. You got to stick with your guys. The more you try to tinker with your lineup, that's when bad things tend to happen. But highly unlikely that Jonas Gray is ever going to have a game like that again, and probably in his entire career, which has already been, like I said, I think on TV they said, he's been around for 3 years now and has never scored a touchdown, just called up from the practice squad. So, yeah, it's agonizing to see those points sitting on your bench, but there's really, nobody could predict that was going to happen, so you just got to swallow it and move on. Definitely, the season's not over yet. Okay, as we said, New Gods Mad Titans taking this one down. He moves up to 9-2, stays in first place. Him and Tree both 9-2, and with a loss, Huber Squashers, now Huber squashed, drops to 5-6 and under 500, but you are still in 6th place and hoping to squeak out a win or two here and these last 2 weeks and sneak your way into the playoffs here. But, alright, so that's pretty much it for week 11. It was a good matchup, a lot of good matchups. Like I said, it was a lot of things could have happened. I'm sure we were kind of hoping that the Rook and McCoy's Homeboys could upset some of those guys, Dub C and the Detonators, but unfortunately they couldn't do it. FC took care of business against FC Hayward, the Twerking Bull Cuts. As we said, the all-season hyped New Gods Mad Titans versus Huber Squashers ended up being a great one. Unfortunately, he couldn't knock off the top guy. Huber Squashers couldn't pull that one off, and the Isotopes couldn't pull off an upset over Possum Magic, maybe knock some of those guys at least down, let some other guys catch up to him. So probably the most important thing, though, coming up here, take a quick look at the standings and the matchups coming up here in Week 12. We got New Gods, Mad Titans, Possum Magic, and FC Bahorik. They've all got the little asterisk next to their names on the Yahoo standings because they've clinched playoff spots. Dub C is 7-4. He's all but clinched a spot. You can probably give him an asterisk. As for the last two spots, Detonators, you're 6-5. You need to get at least another win, I think, to pull out, to definitely get yourself a spot there. But as we know, you have one of the, on paper at least, you have one of the easiest schedules here coming up. You're playing playing bottom teams. As for so really, those top 5 teams are the only teams that are over 500. Detling is 6, and he is 5-6. We got 3 teams actually that are 5-6 now. Huber Squashers, FC Hayward, and You Might Put In. Those guys, you're all still in it. Even the 4-7 teams, Isotopes, Nick Foley, and Dynamite. If either one of you can win these last 2 games, you could possibly. I mean, you need a lot of chips to fall your way, but it's definitely, you are not mathematically eliminated at this point. So it's safe to say. Even though I'm sure Detling would probably argue with that, he can do that though later on this week when the podium is his. But like I said, only the top 5 teams there's only 5 teams over 500. So the Detonators, like I said, you're only at 6. You need to take care of business these last 2 weeks to most likely seal yourself a playoff spot. So there's going to be 5 teams, really. We got 5 teams right now fighting for that 6th spot. So it's going to be interesting, especially, I mean, if those guys could lose this week, if the Isotopes or Nick Foley and Dynamite get a win this week and move up, I mean, FC Hayward's got a tough matchup, Puddin's got a tough matchup, and it could make interesting matchups here could end up being in week 13. As Detling's already mentioned, he's going up against the Isotopes. In theory, if the Isotopes win this week, and other things fall into place, however unlikely, the Isotopes Huber Squashers matchup next week, or in week 13, could potentially be a matchup to fight over the number 6 seed. Like I said, it's unlikely, but it would take a lot of things to happen, a lot of pieces to fall into place for the Isotopes for that to happen. Or it could happen to McFoley and Dynamite. I'm not going to count him out either. Like I said, as we know, it was beaten like a dead horse. Last week, week 11, was a big matchup week, but things didn't quite shake out as dramatically as we'd hoped. With the way things have panned out, like I said, the only 2 teams who are not in playoff contention at this point are McCoy's Homeboys and the Rook. So we'll see what happens this week. Some of those people at the top, they need to keep winning, while the guys at the bottom, Huber Squashers, Twerk and Bowl Cuts, Puddin, Isotopes, and Nick Foley and Dynamite. If any, you guys can pull out some wins. It all depends. I mean, this week might be even more important than last week, week 11. if some of those guys near the bottom can pull out wins this week, there's going to be a big fight for that number 6 seed, or even the 5th one. I'm not going to say the Detonators are, they're not invincible. So it's going to come down to the record, and on top of that, it might come down to point totals too. You got to always keep an eye on that. Get all the points you can from your starting lineup. So we'll definitely have a better picture of what's going to happen going into the playoffs. I think after this week, if a couple of those teams, a couple of those 5 and 6 and 4 and 7 teams can get a win this week, it's really going to jumble things up going into the last week of the regular season. But if they all lose, or if most of them lose, that's pretty much going to be it. I think if the Isotopes lose, Dynamite loses, they'll both have 8 losses, and they will definitely be done. As for Puddin, Hayward, and Squashers, we got to win this week. I feel like I'm not. When it gets to the point where I feel like I'm saying the same things over and over again, you guys are probably thinking, why does he keep just saying the same stuff over and over again? Just end the show already and put a shirt on is what everybody's thinking, I know. So, all right. Congratulations to the Dubsy Hooligans. Jimmy, you owe him $60 at least so far this year. So keep an eye on that. And all right, we're going into week 12. Going to be another exciting week, and hopefully things shake out the way each person wants them to. But unfortunately, they're only going to shake out the way that half of us want them to. So, all right, good luck to everybody here coming up in week 12.